Hello, BookTube, and welcome to another Zoom chat. My guest today is Kieren Westwood, who runs a BookTube or an AuthorTube channel by the same name that's entirely devoted to the subject of writing. Hello, Kieren. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Steve. Thanks for having me on.
I'm wondering if you could give our viewers a sketch of your past as a writer. You
Sure.
make exclusively writing-related content.
Yeah.
If you had to, no one's doing this, of course, but if you had to present your bona fides for doing that, what would they be? What writing have you done?
Well, I suppose it really began at university. I studied English at university, and what I really should have done is go straight in with creative writing. But hindsight being 2020, I had no idea that I had much of an interest in creative writing until I got there. And in my first year, I took some modules in creative writing, specifically about the short story, and just fell in love with it, and then signed up with every creative writing module I could until the end of the degree. And after that, I just started writing more often in my spare time. I work a full-time day job, of course, so writing is just my side thing, but I'd love to turn it into a career one day. But as long as I can just do some writing, I'm usually happy with it. But I've entered a few competitions for mainly for short stuff, some short stories, flash fiction, and I've been shortlisted and longlisted for a couple of prizes or awards over the past 10 years or so. And my first novel somewhat was a fluke. I managed to get to the shortlist of a first novel competition. And obviously then that filled me with confidence. And then since then, just the odd thing here and there. But I really wanted to move into making videos about writing, just because I thought I figured out what works for me, essentially, and maybe I can pass that knowledge onto other new writers. Of course, I don't pretend to be any authority on how exactly writing is done, because it tends to be different for every writer, but I can certainly share some of the stuff I've learned and some of the mistakes I've made along the way. So that's what I try and do.
Now, does any of that urge, the pedagogical urge, the urge to share the sort of meta thinking that you do about the process of writing, does any of the urge to share that come from a lack of the sharing of that was done for you, maybe at university or earlier than that, where plenty of writers at your stage don't have the urge to
Yeah.
share, or even, you probably wouldn't use the term, but I've watched your channel and it definitely applies, to teach.
Yeah.
There are plenty of writers at your stage who would never think of doing that. Where do you think that urge comes from?
It's an interesting conflict within me, really, because at the start of this year, before I'd made a single video, I was looking at other videos online about writing advice and stuff, and I thought I'd really love to do that because I disagree with that, or I heavily agree with that. And I thought, well, but am I, qualified to give any advice? And if I let that boss me around, I would never have made a single video. And the antidote to that for me is just, I quite often say in my videos, if you've watched them, maybe you've seen, but I often say, I don't pretend to be an expert, or this is just my opinion, or this is just how I approach it. So I would hope that the small audience that I've got, and I'm very grateful for, will understand that this is by no means, it's not a university course on writing. It's just one person's opinion and one person's approach. But I tend to find a lot of writing itself, it tends to be, there's approaches that you might not know even are possible if you don't hear somebody talking about it. And that certainly was the case for me. You discover things as you go along, that because everyone says you need to plan everything from the start. So you, as a new writer, you go for that. And if that just doesn't work, you might think, I can't even do this. This isn't even for me. But I want to give people as many options and possibilities as I can for things that have worked for me, in case that might be the route into it for them. I know what it's like to be a silent writer who doesn't speak to anyone and only has the internet and guides and stuff to go by, and perhaps doesn't want to go into higher education or can't afford to go into higher education. I want some alternative for that. And of course, I make no guarantees that a word of my advice will be useful to anyone. However, I think it's just sharing ideas helps me as well as potentially an audience, I would hope.
Well, I'd like to point out for our viewers that Kieren is being a bit modest, because you don't just waffle on philosophically on your channel about writing. The first thing I noticed about your channel is that when you make an observation of a practical nature, you then give an illustration and tear it apart. You point pragmatically to what you're talking about.
Yes.
A great antidote to a lot of
That's
hot air that's out there in the writing instruction world.
yes, yeah.
You say that a
That's
certain opening works, you point out how it works. It doesn't
yeah.
seem to me to leave a whole lot of room for argumentation, but I
Well,
like it all the same.
I'm glad of that. I do see a lot of, I'm not here to, you know, talk disparagingly about any other content creators. I know me, nobody in specifically, but there's a lot of advice there, which is well-meaning, and it comes in the form of, here's the 10 best ways to do this. And I was looking at these 25-minute videos thinking, oh, this is useful stuff, but I just can't take in that amount of
Right.
of information. And plus it's easy to hear something, but you don't necessarily understand it from that. So that's where my examples tend to come from. And I do sometimes use examples from real books, obviously, if I'm making a specific point about those, but I'll try to write something or use something from other work I've done to demonstrate my point where I can, especially old work.
Writing. You're
Yeah.
merciless with it.
Well,
it's fun to watch.
Yeah, it's honest. It's how I feel about my own writing from this. And it's to me, I feel like to even say, oh, I've really advanced as a writer since I wrote this or whatever, that even feels a little arrogant to me, because I'm so I don't know, I don't shout up my own writing too much or my own ability with anything, but I think that's just a British trait perhaps. But
what is your daily writing life like? Do you write every day?
I don't write specifically on a project every day, but I was speaking to another mentor of mine that I have Zoom conversations with. He's a writer himself, and he pushed me to, because I wasn't considering what I was doing with YouTube and specifically scripting these videos and making my point. I wasn't considering that writing practice. And he said, well, it really is. So in some ways I do write every day because I'm always adding to that sort of thing. But in terms of actual writing, I have a method for that, which is very much separate. So I don't know if you can see, I have a record player behind me, which some would say is, you know, affected or hipster or whatever, but they might be right. But if I'm going to write something on my project, I make a point to turn that on and close the door and really make a real thing of it. So that happens, I mean, twice a week, maybe more. If I've got time on the weekend, I'll write as much as I can. But I used to write religiously every day because of my routine. I used to go to my office in my day job at an hour early, write for an hour, and then stay an hour afterwards and write for another hour to make sure I got that time in. And that worked for the routine I was in. But now I don't have to do that. That wasn't productive for me. I was getting words down and I was writing a lot, but they weren't valuable. It wasn't good stuff. I wasn't teaching myself and I wasn't making any valid points with what I was writing. I was writing in the hopes of getting published so that I could leave my job. That was essentially what I was doing. And that doesn't produce the best quality writing, as you might imagine. So now it's very much, I'm in the mood for some writing. So I'm going to get my record player on and sit and add something to it. And if that's 250 words, great. If that's 4 pages, 5,000 words, whatever the case, I'll stop when I'm ready to stop. And that's when I start too. So it has changed. But no, I don't believe you have to write every day, but I believe you have to think about writing every day.
And you have an ongoing project.
Yeah, I do. I've been writing novels and learning to write novels for the last 7 years on or off, and I've written 7. I've written 7 novels. I've finished 7 drafts of novels. Revising is a whole different ball game. But yeah, I have a new project that I'm starting now. It's going to take a long time to write. I've written a novel in 3 months before, and I'm never going to do that again. So yeah, my new project.
Do you have associations in your real life with other writers?
Do I? Sorry, what?
It's probably an outdated question because of the pandemic, but have you had associations with other writers, face-to-face associations, writing groups or things like that?
Briefly during university, but this is my big problem. I think I've said in a video once or twice, I went completely insular and on my own for writing. I thought I could just learn everything myself, and that there wasn't any value to speaking to other writers or whatever, because it all comes down to me. I'm in charge of it at the end of the day. I've got to do what I've got to do with it. So I didn't for a long time. Since joining AuthorTube, now I do on a regular basis. People leave me comments and I leave comments on other people's AuthorTube videos. And I've got Discord servers with other people that I speak to about writing. And I cannot tell you what a difference it made to my outlook and my productivity It's
Different in a good way?
yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah. I know more felt, alone and sort of miserably just putting words down and hoping for the best. It's just a great to have a conversation with someone about something and that they understand you.
Now, you
I've got,
mentioned that just rotely sitting down and writing pages in order to sell a book and quit your job is a
yeah.
bad place to draw writing from. I agree with that. But
Hmm.
when you do sit down to write, is there a thought of the future? What is the future of those 7 drafts?
Those 7, they probably, in all likelihood, don't have much of a future. And I'm all right with that. I'm very much a perfectionist. The thing is, I have 7 drafts, and some people might think you've got 7 books and you're not going to do anything with them. But the process of learning to write those books and everything I learned up to that is way more valuable to me than a paycheck would be. So I'm happy with it. It's all banked experience that I've got. I
That,
learned something valuable in every one of them.
and
So
and that continues. That
yeah,
attitude continues. You call
oh
yourself a
yeah,
perfectionist, but a philosophy that comes through in your channel over and over again is actually very inviting. You're constantly telling your listeners that they have the tools now to start writing,
yeah.
and that the process of growing and educating themselves is never ending.
Yes, I strongly believe that you can learn something from every bad book and every great book that you read, and you can learn something from every bad bit of writing and every great bit of writing that you do. I don't think, I think where that comes from mainly with me is because I've never approached 2 projects in exactly the same way, or 2 novels in exactly the same way. Every time I ever begin a new project, it's different. I mean, there's a quote by Gene Wolfe, which is my favorite quote about writing, and it says, you never learn to write a novel, you just learn to write the novel that you're writing. And that speaks to me. That's definitely how I operate. So I always consider that I've got plenty to learn. And I think I always will do. It's a way to propel myself forward and keep making progress, because if you rely on stuff like being published or making money to feel validated or to feel accomplished as a writer, that stuff is never guaranteed, far from it. But my own progress and the satisfaction I get from that, that's what I look for, and that's what I hope to get with everything I write, really.
Your videos are extremely polished. They they
Yeah,
they seem like
thanks.
they take a lot of planning.
They do take planning. I spend time every day, pretty much first thing in the morning, 6 a.m. I'll sit and I'll start planning, and I record on a Saturday morning, again 6 a.m. while the neighborhood is quiet and I don't get any background noise. Luckily, I have a quiet house anyway. But yeah, I plan those all week running up to it. And then by Saturday, I've got 2 videos there ready to write and record. One of them goes live Sunday and one of them goes live Wednesday every week. And it takes quite a bit of work to do that. I sacrifice a lot of time on a Saturday morning and then editing throughout the week. They are very polished. I've got an interest in photography as well. So once I bought a camera and started fiddling with it, that was the end for me. No longer the iPhone videos on my channel. It's all moved to that. But I just enjoy video editing as well.
Well, you stress in your videos over and over again what you've stressed in this chat, which is that you are not putting yourself forward as an authority.
Mm.
But in your videos, you are, for want of a better word, extremely authoritative. You definitely know what you're talking about for the reason that you say here, because you've lived through the learning of it. Does
Yeah,
that cause some people to approach you in a teacher type way? Do you have people, viewers of your videos, who approach you and want advice?
I do. Yeah, I've got a couple of people that I've approached, or that they've approached me, and I've read over some of their work. That's something I love doing, but I can't help the compulsion to say this is just my opinion, which I think is valid. I think the best writer in the world is still just one opinion. But yeah, they do approach me, and I understand the question with I talk about not being an authority on a thing, but yeah, at the same time sounding that way. I'm very, I mean, I suppose I'm an authority on my opinion, and I'm sure of how I feel about things, but I'm not necessarily sure that they are the truth that applies to everyone, if that makes sense. That feels like it was a politician's answer. I apologize.
Well, it was at least a political one, and that's
Yeah.
necessary because feelings run high when you're
Oh
talking
yeah,
about creativity. They run high.
definitely.
But where do you do your own learning about writing? Are there, for instance, AuthorTube channels that you watch or authors that you follow on? social
Yeah,
media? Or...
there's plenty of author tubers, big ones and little ones. I'm subscribed to a load of them, so I tend to watch those, which is great also for knowing what people are looking for. You can see what videos did well and what didn't, so you can sort of customize your content towards that, which is never a bad thing. But I definitely think every writer has something to contribute to the the universal vat of writing experience, and I don't write off anybody. One of the writers that approached me through my channel is fairly new to writing, and we've talked about a lot of the craft of writing with him, and I've learned a lot from his opinions of stuff, as well as he has of mine, because it's been a long time since I was sat in front of a page with no idea about what to do, because I have these foundation skills or foundation ways of looking at things, and most of what comes after that spreads out, so that's all brand new to me with every project. But I can always come back to, well, I know how to do this, so I stick to that. But sometimes having that challenged as well is really useful.
What is, when you mentioned the projects that you do, the ones you've done in the past, the ones that are present, what is the goal? Is there only one goal? Is there a fixed goal, or is it a moving thing? It doesn't sound like the goal is traditional publishing.
No, it's moving. It's always moving. The goal definitely isn't traditional publishing for me anymore, I would say. I've had some experience with it. That first novel I got all the confidence from because it was shortlisted for a prize. I sent it out to literary agents, and I got the attention of one for almost a year. That project wasn't quite what it needed to be, but she saw some potential in me, so said, well, what else have you got? So I wrote another novel, which I finished in a number of months, which I'd started, and I just wrote it as quick as I could in order to get it to her so it could be sold, and that could be it. But it didn't ultimately go anywhere. We had a revise and resubmit agreement, and it just wasn't good enough because I was trying to write too quickly. After that, I have self-published a couple of times, but that was mainly because I've got family abroad who wanted to read the book, and people that wanted a paper copy of the book. So I thought, well, I'll find out how this self-publishing thing works, and maybe it'll be a fluke and I'll sell loads of copies. That didn't happen because I didn't put the time into it. So as for the future, this next novel project, I really don't know. Probably self-publishing is the route I would favor, but I never say never with traditional publishing as well. I haven't got agents or publishing houses in mind or anything like that, but I leave the door open. I tend not to close the door on anything. I don't want to burn any bridges. But
what is the daydream, though?
The dream is, well, I don't know how I would sell books. I don't really mind how I would sell books, but selling books and being able to do this, to do writing as a full-time job would be absolutely, but it's just so rare that happens. Even for very successful authors, as I understand it, it can be difficult to make a full-time income. So stuff, I'd love to grow YouTube though.
You'd do a lot of that work, right? Self-publishing, you would have to do a lot of the design and the selling and the marketing.
Yeah.
You could only outsource that if you paid to outsource it.
Definitely. I also love Photoshop and design and that kind of thing. So I am that terrible writer that people warn you about, where they try and do everything. I'll design my own cover, I'll write the blurb, I'll plan the novel, I'll market the novel, I'll do it all myself. And that's from that place of perfectionism, which needs to be checked sometimes, definitely. But I do also recognize some skills that I have that are valuable and I can put towards that. What I don't have is editing and that kind of thing. I think that obviously I'll edit my own projects, but in order to get real value from that, that's something I have to outsource. But right now my focus has very much been on growing YouTube for some time. And I find the horrible need to do something else than just a full-time job is satiated slightly by YouTube anyway, because I feel like I'm making progress and helping other people and helping myself with my writing anyway. So it's like it's a hobby with definite benefits. So it's a great question, but I don't really know about the future of publishing for me. I'm going to wait and see what happens.
What about the future of YouTube? What has that process been like as it unfolded?
Oh, it's interesting. It's a really hard thing to put a video of yourself on the internet, as you'll well know. But I found it to be really welcoming. The AuthorTube community has has come out and accepted me. I think I'm still growing very slowly, but I'm definitely seeing more growth now than I was even a month or 2 months ago. And I'm just still grateful for every subscriber that comes along, because part of me still thinks, I'm surprised anybody's watching this stuff. Even though I believe what I'm saying is valid, there's still all that always imposter syndrome.
What about the source of what you're saying? Where do the ideas for the videos come from? Do they come from obstacles that you're encountering in your own writing week by week?
Usually, yes. That or something specific that I spot in another author's work, whether good or bad. If I come across something I really like, I think, oh, that's a great way to do that. I don't do that. I'll make a video about it. And usually through that scripting process that I mentioned with the videos, I discover more about that skill. I analyze it myself, and it takes me back to high school and university English classes, and sort of deconstructing what they've done and how they did it. And I learn more, and then I want to pass that on with the video. And also, I want to go back and watch those videos myself sometimes if I'm struggling with a certain thing, because I think it'll honestly help me. Because obviously that's the way that I learn is by visuals and by examples, so I can go back and watch my own content and hopefully refresh myself when I need to.
Who are those examples for you? How much reading time do you fit in what sounds like a very crowded schedule?
Yeah, it tends to be in the hours of my lunch break in my day job, or for a little bit afterwards. I have a chair in the corner over there that I will turn off all electricals and sit for maybe an hour at a time and read something. But in terms of influence, I'd say Emily St. John Mandel is probably up there as one of my favorites, starting with Station 11, and then I've read all of her other novels. You may want to hover your finger over the leave meeting button, Steve, but I also like The Road by Cormac McCarthy, which I know is dude bro lit of the highest order, I'm aware. But the beauty of discussion is that we can disagree.
Her head up when that name is mentioned.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of McCarthy's back catalogue that doesn't do anything for me at all. But so there's that book. I like short stories too, because that's where I started from university. Raymond Carver and people like that. I like those short stories. And Wells Tower has a good Everything Ravaged, Everything Burned. That's a great set of stories. I really like that. That's how I think about story. It tends to be from a small moment or a small snapshot, as I like to call it, and then I'll work outwards, and whether that turns into a short story or a novel. But they all tend to start small.
Are you more comfortable in the shorter or the longer?
I've spent more time writing the longer, but I would say I probably enjoy the shorter form more, because it's instant gratification. I can write a flash fiction of 500 words in a night or two, and then I've got something. I can send it off to prizes or competitions. But there's an ultimate satisfaction in writing a long piece and finishing another novel. So depends. I say this quite often in my videos, but it depends what week you ask me and how my week's been. But I like to think I'm comfortable writing both of them.
Does the again, I want to call it a pedagogical angle, because I'm not meaning to mischaracterize your YouTube channel, but you do lay out rules or observances anyway, tendencies. You pick apart things on a critical level, and I'm wondering if that tendency. I mean, you write these scripts, you do a lot of rewriting on these scripts. You do this, as you said, you devote a lot of time to it. Does that seep into reading other people's work? If you pick up a collection of short stories, does it lessen your enjoyment or change it in some way?
I'm not sure if it lessens my enjoyment, but it definitely makes me pickier, which I don't think is a great thing, because, like I said, you can benefit from reading bad writing sometimes. But I won't spend an awful lot of time on something I'm really not enjoying. But I do tend to analyze a little bit more. It's like a switch which is always on with me. I can be reading something for total pleasure with no other aim in mind, and then I'll think, oh, I really like what they did with that. Let me just get my notepad and I'll write something down, and then it becomes another YouTube video.
Or the reverse. You'll read something and say, boy, you botched that moment.
Yes, yeah, I tend to do that. But then out of kindness or out of cowardice, it's up to you to decide. I will tend to then recreate that using my own example of something I've written, and then I will use that example outside of that particular author, rather than calling people out. I'll call people out for good stuff, but not necessarily bad stuff. It's just
well, without mentioning names, has that critical process cost you some authors? As that critical process grows, have you found that some authors that made perfect company once upon a time, you just can't
Yeah.
do anymore?
Interestingly that you say, I think Cormac McCarthy is a great example of that. I read The Road was the first book of his that I read and found it readable. And then I read some of the Border trilogy and thought, well, I don't understand why I'm having to go to Google Translate to figure out why there's 3 paragraphs in Spanish. That lost me. And then there was long points where I thought, well, there's no punctuation in this. There's no anything. And I have definitely changed my opinion on that. I do not consider him a literary genius. I am not. God, I hope I'm not a typical dude bro lit reader, but as I've heard your videos on it, and they terrified me the first time. I thought, oh God, The Road.
They'll always
But,
take you back. Don't worry. They'll always take you back.
yeah, but
Unless
yeah,
you mention Jane Austen. Then you're out, and you're out for good.
yeah. I've never read a Jane Austen, to be honest
There you
with you.
go. They'll take you back.
No, I passed the bar. I'm through. Okay, that's good to know. But yeah, it does cost me authors. It does make me think twice about things that I read earlier, years ago, that I thought this was good, and I now read things and think, yeah, but I've read far better since. The nostalgia of something you thought you loved when you first read it. I suppose you change as a reader as well as a writer over the years, but some things stay the same and some things just don't.
Now, I want to wrap up on a natural question for me, a question that
Sure.
naturally comes to my mind. You mentioned that you've self-published some books so that friends can read it. You've mentioned things like that, and I'm wondering to what extent any of your previous projects have been exposed to the cold surgical knife of a critic, someone who doesn't know you at all, someone who's not in any kind of relationship with you. Has that ever happened?
Yes. Well, in the sense, one of the things I did at the turn of the year was enter this flash fiction novella competition, which
Right,
was
competitions, right. So you'd have judges.
yeah. So there's that, and I got through to the shortlist for that, and then the judge of that competition contacted me to say he offers a mentoring service, and would I like to do just this, which is talk about writing, and he critiqued that manuscript for me and went through it, and so in that respect, I've had some criticism through there. My wife is an excellent proofreader, but of course she would enjoy all my writing, but I do trust her opinion. She knows her books. But besides that, I make my writing available. It's available on my website. If people want to go and read it, they are more than welcome to.
All the links to everything down below, your website,
Thanks.
your channel, and everything.
Yeah, that's sort of my. I probably should be more active in not marketing that, but offering that as an option for validation of my points, I suppose, because I could say, if you're not sure my opinion is worth its salt, by all means go and read my writing. That's fine with me. So yeah, I've been rejected by an awful lot of literary agents, but I usually get the same response to them, which is, we really like this, but we just can't sell it.
Right.
And that's what burned me out of approaching them anymore, to be honest.
That's actually an encouraging response, right?
It is.
That's
yeah.
A whole order of magnitude different from this doesn't fit, thanks anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, places usually make fine distinctions between those sorts of things. If you detect a note, even a faint note of encouragement in a form letter from an agency or a publicist or whatever, it's meant to be there.
Yeah, that's how I chose to take it, because I've had a lot of standard forms of thanks, this isn't for us, and that's more or less all it says. And then I've had ones going, me and my assistant both read this, and while we like it, we're just not sure in the current market or whatever. And I always take that as encouragement. There's not a lot of positivity to be taken from cold calling people essentially with queries. So I take it where I can.
So can we fade to black with some of your advice to the writers and would-be writers who are out there, the boiled down essentials?
Yeah, I think
say to them, I'm sure a lot of them are listening.
My 2 biggest tips for writing at all is, number 1 is finish things. So you cannot learn to write an entire story unless you write that entire story. You can start 50 or 100 stories, but you still won't be able to write a full one until you've finished the whole thing. And the second one, which is the thing I've learned this year, is talk to other writers, whatever stage they're at, especially if they're further along in their writing life than you. Talk to them, discuss writing. The benefits of it are endless, even if you don't think they might be, which is the huge mistake that I made.
Wonderful. Well, Kieran, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for having me on. This was great.
I'm gonna wrap this up now, and I will leave, as I mentioned to everybody else, I will leave links to everything.
Thanks so much.
So that they can find you and test you out. Although they're going to enjoy your channel, they're very much going to enjoy your channel. So have a wonderful day. We'll talk again.
You too. Thanks.